Hey guys, tonight we step back in time, dust off our modern sneakers, and trudge right into the dirt-packed streets of a medieval village. Imagine it, the sun barely peeking over the thatched roofs, birds squabbling in the rafters, and the smell of smoke and damp wool hanging in the cool morning air. You probably won't survive this without catching a whiff of horse manure, but that's part of the charm, more the challenge. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, post your location and local time. It's oddly satisfying to see where everyone's tuning in from. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge along a narrow dirt lane, toes sinking slightly into the soft, uneven ground. Roosters crow insistently from almost every yard, as if auditioning for a medieval alarm company. Villagers begin to stir. Wooden shutters bang open, and a woman's bare feet slap against the stone threshold as she steps out to fetch water from the well. You can hear a child whimper, a goat bleating, and the distant clatter of a cart's wheels on rutted tracks. Historians still argue whether the average village had more than a few dozen permanent residents, or whether some were temporary clusters tied to seasonal labor. But either way, the air is thick with the intimacy of community. You pause near the first cottage and notice the simple construction: wattle and daub walls patched with mud, a roof thatched from reeds, smoke curling lazily from a crooked chimney. This smoke isn't just for cooking. It's the village's natural insect repellent. And yes, sometimes it smells faintly like burnt hair. Quirky fact: some villagers swore that hanging cowbells in the rafters kept evil spirits away, which probably sounds like a convenient excuse to justify more noise in the morning. You take a deep breath and feel that chill that creeps into bones before the sun warms the clay and straw. Your fingers tingle, remembering the soft, gritty feel of mud under your nails, a sensation that modern life has mercifully scrubbed out of most of us. Out in the lane, a group of men yoke a pair of oxen to a plow, straining against the leather harnesses as they cut into the soil. Their calls to one another rise above the rhythmic thud of hooves and metal. You can almost sense the timeless partnership between human and animal, the ox, slow but steady, and the man, shouting encouragement and occasionally swatting flies. Around them, small children chase each other, laughing, kicking up dust that hangs in lazy spirals. You notice a woman balancing a basket on her hip, eggs wobbling precariously, clearly trying not to jostle her fragile cargo. Historians still argue whether peasants had rigid daily schedules or if their rhythm more naturally followed the sun and seasons. But either way, you feel the pulse of the village in every motion. From this vantage point, smoke and smells begin to layer. Wood smoke, fresh hay, baking bread, and yes, manure. It's all part of the sensory collage that defines dawn in this village. You hear the distant bleat of a goat as it struggles against a weak tether, and your nose twitches. Speaking of goats, quirky little tidbit. Villagers sometimes believed that goat eyes could predict weather, which might explain why old Mrs. Beckett keeps peering at her nanny goat every morning as if it's a furry meteorologist. You sidestep a puddle left by last night's rain and feel the mud cling to your boots, reminding you that the comforts of indoor plumbing were centuries away. You pass another cottage where a man sharpens a knife against a whetstone, sparks flying in the morning light. You can hear his steady wheeze and the scrape of steel against stone. A child clings to his mother's skirt, watching the process like it's theater. The air carries chatter about yesterday's small harvest, gossip about who borrowed a chicken and forgot to return it, and the faint hum of a bell from the church across the village. Historians still argue whether gossip served as informal social control or was just a guilty pleasure for villagers with too much time and too few books. Either way, you feel pulled into the conversation even without knowing the language in detail, because the tone and energy transcend centuries. Turning the corner, you spy a man carrying a bucket of water from the communal well. Water is heavy in clay pots, and he shifts the weight, grimacing. Nearby, a dog trots behind, tail wagging, nose to the ground. The villager's movement seems chaotic, but you notice subtle patterns. The same people moving at similar times. The same animals making predictable noises, a rhythm that is almost musical in its repetition. Quirky fact: some villagers tied ribbons or bits of cloth to their animals' tails, believing it made them run faster or warded off disease. You try not to giggle at the thought of a medieval goat sporting a neon ribbon. You wander past a small garden patch, herbs and vegetables clinging stubbornly to life. Sage, parsley, and leeks push through damp earth, while carrots hide their bright tips beneath the soil. A woman kneels, pulling weeds with deft fingers, and offers a half-smile as you pass. She is familiar with hard labor, her hands calloused and streaked with dirt. Her routine, like that of every villager, is dictated by season, sun, and necessity. Historians still argue whether every villager had equal access to garden plots or whether some were strictly allocated by status. But from where you stand, everyone seems busy enough to keep the community fed. You notice the first tendrils of smoke rising from another chimney, more pungent this time-bred baking perhaps. The scent is oddly comforting, mingling with the sharper smells of wet soil and livestock. You remember that, centuries later, people would romanticize this simple life, but in truth, mornings are demanding. No one here lingers over a latte. There's work to do before the sun climbs higher. Quirky aside, some villagers believed that sneezing first thing in the morning could ward off evil spirits, so expect a chorus of sneezes alongside the roosters. You chuckle quietly, imagining a line of people actively trying to scare away invisible mischief before breakfast. As the sun rises fully, it catches on wooden beams, highlighting the textures of thatch, mud, and stone. The village seems to exhale, settling into its daily rhythm. Children begin fetching water, animals are herded, and smoke from hearths thickens, adding a golden haze. You feel the chill fading from your skin, replaced by a gentle warmth. The same warmth villagers will rely on for comfort and cooking throughout the day. This is their dawn, their awakening, and now. Thanks to your slightly anachronistic presence, you're sharing it with them. You take it in, knowing that the rest of the day work, chores, gossip, and perhaps a little mischief will follow naturally. And somewhere between the rooster's crow and the bread scent, you realize you've arrived, fully immersed in the pulse of medieval village life. You step through the low doorway of your assigned cottage and immediately feel the cozy squeeze of the interior. The air is warm, tinged with the sweet, smoky scent of burning peat and the faint tang of fermented grains from last night's ale. The walls, rough and uneven, are made from wattle and daub, which is essentially a lattice of sticks plastered with mud, straw, and sometimes dung. Historians still argue whether villagers added the latter more for structural integrity or because hygiene standards were a very different concept back then. You probably won't survive touching the walls without getting some grit under your nails. But there's something oddly grounding about feeling the raw materials of life in your hands. A fire crackles in the hearth, consuming a mix of wood and dried animal dung. You can hear it sputter and snap, a hypnotic accompaniment to the slow stirring of the household. A woman tends the pot, a thick stew bubbling inside, and the aroma fills the room. Herb sage, thyme, and a hint of garlic cling to the walls and ceiling beams, fighting the smoky haze that seeps from the fireplace. The hearth isn't just a source of warmth. It's the social hub, the kitchen, and occasionally a sleeping space for the youngest children. Quirky tidbit: some villagers claimed that keeping an iron poker in the hearth warded off witches, which probably explains the mysterious assortment of oddly bent tools lying about. You notice the furniture is sparse but practical. A low wooden table scarred from years of chopping, benches with rickety legs, and a chest in the corner that doubles as storage and seating. The floor is packed earth, swept daily, yet still carrying traces of yesterday's grime. A cat slinks in, perhaps hunting mice or just enjoying the heat, and you bend to watch its velvet paws on the dust-brown floor. Scholars debate whether cats were officially welcomed in every home or considered mysterious nuisances. But in practice, everyone tolerated them, sometimes out of superstition, sometimes because a mouse in the grain could ruin weeks of work. As you move further inside, you feel the textures under your fingertips. Rough woolen blankets, coarse hemp ropes, and wooden tools smoothened by decades of use. There's no separation between kitchen and living space. The entire room breathes as a single functional organism. Children tumble around the fire, laughing, dodging a slow-moving hen that pecks at spilled grains. The smell of soot clings to everything, and you rub your arms, realizing your modern skin isn't used to this constant smoky embrace. Quirky fact: some villagers hung strips of dried herbs near the ceiling to purify the air, an early, fragrant version of air fresheners. You glance upward at the ceiling beams. They're blackened from centuries of smoke, yet sturdy, and sometimes decorated with simple carvings, initials, dates, or even crude animals. The thatch above rattles slightly as the wind moves, a sound both comforting and unsettling. If you listen closely, you can hear the faint scurry of rats or mice, which are tolerated to an extent, as keeping cats and dogs busy reduces the population. Historians still argue whether this constant battle with vermin affected village layouts or if it was merely an accepted background annoyance. Either way, you can't help but feel the pulse of life in these intimate, imperfect spaces. You kneel to inspect the hearth. The embers glow with a hypnotic orange light, and you realize it's more than a fire, it's the heart of the home. Villagers cook, heat water, dry clothes, and sometimes even perform minor craftwork here. The smoke stings your eyes, and you instinctively wave it away, but the woman simply squints and adjusts the pot. You catch her expression, a mixture of tolerance and pride, the kind that comes from generations of survival in a world without modern heating or kitchens. Quirky aside, some families believed that letting the smoke linger too long would make ghosts happy. A charming superstition to justify perpetually blackened walls. On one side of the room, a loom sits idle, strands of wool stretched taut and ready for weaving. The rhythm of the loom, when in use, fills the space with a quiet, hypnotic pattern. You imagine yourself attempting to weave, only to end up in knots and tangles, while the woman hums softly to herself, fingers deftly knotting and interlacing threads. Historians still argue whether weaving was primarily a domestic necessity or a small-scale cottage industry. But either way, it occupies significant time, especially during winter months when outdoor work dwindled. You notice the storage chest again. Its lid creaks as you lift it, revealing folded blankets, some small clothing items, and a few treasured keepsakes, perhaps a carved wooden figurine or a stitched pouch. Every item has purpose. Nothing is frivolous. The villagers' lives are stripped to essentials, but even in simplicity, there's a human need for beauty and memory. Quirky tidbit: occasionally, villagers placed lucky charms or bits of iron inside the chest to protect possessions from theft or enchantment. A mix of practicality and superstition. Children gather around, intrigued by your presence. You crouch to their level, noticing calloused hands and dirt-streaked faces, yet bright, curious eyes. Some begin recounting the morning's minor adventures. Who spilled the milk? Which dog chased the hen? Which elder scolded the goats? Their voices create a tapestry of communal life, each thread distinct yet inseparable from the whole. Historians still argue whether children's daily labor was excessive by modern standards or simply appropriate preparation for adult responsibilities, but you can see the balance of work and play that defines their world. The morning stretches and sunlight filters through small windows, illuminating dust motes like floating gold. Why? Take in the simple domestic scene. The fire, the chatter, the smell of earth and cooking mingled together. The cottage is more than shelter. It is a crucible of life, a small universe of effort, care, and occasional chaos. You reach for a ladle, tasting the stew. It's thick, earthy, perhaps too salty, yet sustaining. You feel, for the first time, the rhythm of medieval home life. And it seeps into your bones. The textures, smells, warmth. An unspoken hierarchy, all forming a subtle harmony that keeps the village alive. The door swings open and the morning air rushes in, mingling with smoke and the faint scent of baking bread. You step outside, boots caked in mud, ready to follow the villagers into fields, workshops, and the broader tapestry of their day. But for now, you linger a moment in this intimate domestic sphere, absorbing the textures and routines that will echo through every subsequent experience. In this humble home, the heartbeat of the village is tangible, a constant reminder that survival, community, and small joys are inseparable in this world. Stepping out of the cottage, you feel the cool air slap your face and the sun beginning to warm the soil beneath your boots. You join the villagers as they trudge toward the fields, a sprawling patchwork of green and brown stretching to the horizon. The rhythm of the day begins here, where the village meets the land. And every footstep reminds you that food, livelihood, and survival depend on your hands, the soil, and the seasons. Historians still argue whether medieval plowing techniques were consistent across regions or adapted continuously to local challenges. But one thing is undeniable: the work is relentless. You watch as a farmer yokes a pair of oxen, their broad backs and heavy hooves pressing into the soft, damp earth. The plow, a simple wooden frame with an iron tip, bites into the soil, turning furrows that look like waves frozen in time. The farmer mutters to himself, guiding the oxen while adjusting the plow's depth, a dance perfected by repetition. You probably won't survive the strain of this work without aching muscles, but the meditative cadence is oddly mesmerizing. Quirky fact: some farmers believe that speaking kindly to oxen or even singing to them would make them pull stronger. An early version of motivational coaching for livestock. The fields are dotted with villagers performing different tasks. Children scatter seeds under the watchful eye of their parents. Women bend over rows of vegetables, weeding or loosening soil with wooden hoes, while men handle the heavier labor of plowing and hauling. The earthy aroma of freshly turned soil mixes with the faint scent of manure, a potent fertilizer and a reminder of the practical realities of farming life. You step carefully to avoid a pile of compost, which is both vital for growth and surprisingly aromatic. Historians still argue whether medieval villagers rotated crops effectively or simply relied on tradition and intuition to maintain fertility. But either way, the results feed the village. You notice the interplay of seasons on the fields. In spring, the soil is soft and wet, ready to receive seeds. By summer, the crops sway in the wind, golden with promise. Come autumn, the harvest dominates the entire village, a frenetic period of activity and exhaustion. Quirky tidbit: some villages hung charms in the fields to coax better yields, often in the shape of small animals or human figures, blending superstition and hope. You watch a scarecrow-like figure swaying in the breeze, and can't help but imagine it whispering encouragement to the wheat. Walking along a narrow furrow, you spot a group of villagers tending a small pond nearby. They're irrigating their crops, scooping water with clay pots and dragging it across the dry earth. The mud squelches underfoot, and you feel it cling to your boots as if claiming ownership of your presence. Children splash nearby, laughter mingling with the slap of water and the chirping of crickets hidden in the reeds. Historians still argue whether water management was organized communally or largely left to individual plots. But either way, it is laborious, noisy, and crucial for survival. You pause at a patch of wildflowers sprouting along the edge of the field. They are not just decorative. Villagers use some for medicine, dye, and ritual. Chamomile for tea, nettle for soup, and marigold for ointments. Quirky tidbit: some herbalists swore that placing certain flowers near the plow could ward off bad luck or enhance growth. A charming blend of observation and superstition. You crouch to touch a stalk, feeling its roughness between your fingers and noticing tiny insects clinging to leaves, an ecosystem buzzing invisibly beneath the apparent chaos. Your boots sink into furrows carved by repeated passes of oxen and plow, and you realize how every step of this labor is interconnected. Plowing, sowing, weeding, irrigating task relies on the others. The rhythm of the fields is almost musical, punctuated by the grunts of exertion, the slap of a hoe against soil, the occasional clatter of a tool dropped in haste. You inhale deeply, smelling the wet earth and the faint scent of rain lingering in the furrows. And for a moment, you are part of this dance, a participant rather than an observer. A man walks past carrying a sack of seed, his face streaked with sweat and dirt, and you notice the small, improvisational tricks villagers use to ease their labor. Knots and ropes to stabilize loads, slings to carry water, and even a crude harness for a young ox. Historians still argue whether these tools were locally invented or borrowed from neighboring villages. But innovation thrives when necessity bites hard, and you can feel that energy pulsing in every gesture. Quirky fact: some plowmen whispered short rhymes to the oxen. Claiming the words helped guide the animal's movement, essentially medieval rap verses for fieldwork. You spot a small grove at the edge of the farmland, where villagers collect firewood, fruit, and wild herbs. The wood is chopped with heavy axes, the sound sharp and rhythmic against the backdrop of distant birdsong. Baskets brimming with herbs. Nuts and berries are carried back to cottages, and the smell of sap mixes with earth and dung. Children trail behind, carrying lighter bundles and learning the names of plants, a hands-on education that feels like survival, wrapped in curiosity. Historians still argue whether such informal teaching was systematic or purely incidental, but either way, it prepares the next generation to maintain the village. A sudden breeze rustles the crops, and you notice the sway of wheat, barley, and oats glinting in the sun. The smell is faintly sweet, mixed with dust and mud, a scent that is earthy and honest. You pause to listen. A cowbell clinks, oxen grunt, children chatter, a dog barks somewhere in the distance. Every sound and smell reinforces the immersion into life tethered to the land, a life where rhythm and survival are inseparable. Quirky tidbit: villagers sometimes hung small bells in the fields to talk to the crops, believing the jingling encouraged growth or frightened pests away. The morning progresses and the sun rises higher, warming your shoulders and drying the dew from your clothes. Sweat runs down your back as you follow a line of villagers harvesting root vegetables. You dig into the soil with a wooden fork, pulling up carrots and turnips, noticing how different the textures are under your fingers. The earth is damp, sticky, and stubborn, clinging to the roots. You feel a mixture of satisfaction and exhaustion, a tangible connection to the hard work that sustains the village. Historians still argue whether villagers rotated crops meticulously or relied more on trial, error, and tradition, but the result, the food, is what counts in this moment. As the day stretches on, you witness the camaraderie among villagers, brief jokes, shared stories, and mutual encouragement. Someone drops a tool, and another hand reaches down without a word. A woman balances a basket on her head, smiling despite the strain, and a child trots behind with a handful of weeds, proudly presenting their small harvest. You feel a gentle camaraderie in the rhythm of labor, a sense that each person's efforts ripple through the community. Quirky aside, some fields had small, improvised shrines or stones that villagers believed protected the crops, often featuring random carvings or offerings of food. You step lightly around one, unsure if you're showing respect or just avoiding tripping. By midday, the fields shimmer in the sunlight, and the village seems to breathe collectively. Sweat, soil, laughter, and song mix into a sensory cocktail that is distinctly human and distinctly medieval. You pause to admire the network of furrows, paths, and communal spaces, realizing that every inch has been shaped by hands, animals, and necessity. This is a living, breathing organism: crops, humans and animals, entwined in cycles of labor, superstition, and cooperation. And though the work is grueling, there's a quiet beauty in the repetition, a subtle harmony that reminds you why the village endures despite hardship, weather, and the ever-present threat of famine. As you trudge back toward the village center, boots caked in mud, arms sore from hauling water and planting seeds, you carry a newfound respect for the rhythm of field life. Every furrow tells a story, every sweat-soaked shirt hints at discipline, and every laughter-filled break between chores speaks to resilience and community. You felt the pulse of the village, grounded in soil and labor, a pulse that will carry forward into the workshops, markets, and hearths you'll explore next. For now, you savor the scent of turned earth and the warm weight of the sun, knowing that the heartbeat of the village is inseparable from the land itself. You follow the narrow path from the fields into the heart of the village, where the steady rhythm of plows and oxen fades into the clatter, hammering, and murmured conversation of workshops. The scent of sweat, wood smoke, and molten metal greets you first. And you realize that the village is alive not only in fields but in craft, trade, and the constant hum of human ingenuity. Historians still argue whether most villagers were generalists capable of many skills or whether specialization was more common, but either way, the workshops are a testament to medieval adaptability. The blacksmith's forge dominates the first courtyard you enter. Sparks fly as the hammer strikes red-hot iron, echoing off the walls like a primitive percussion section. You can feel the heat radiate even from a few feet away, and the smell of burning coal mixes with sweat and molten metal. The blacksmith wipes his brow and gives you a sideways glance, nodding as if acknowledging the absurdity of a visitor wandering into such a fiery, noisy environment. Quirky fact: some blacksmiths believed that hammering in rhythm with a chant or song could improve the quality of the metal, an early fusion of work and music. You probably won't survive standing too close for long, but it's mesmerizing to watch skill, strength, and fire combine into tangible tools. Adjacent to the forge, a weaver bends over a wooden loom, hands deftly threading strands of wool into cloth. The rhythmic clack of the shuttle complements the hammering from the blacksmith. You notice the colors of the wall: natural browns, muted yellows, and occasional dyed threads of blue or red, derived from plants or insects. Some of the dyeing techniques are surprisingly sophisticated. The use of madder root, weld, or cochineal demonstrates villagers' experimental chemistry. Long before chemistry was a thing, historians still argue whether weaving and dyeing were primarily domestic activities or small-scale industries selling to nearby towns. But the visual complexity of the cloth reveals both practicality and artistry. You wander toward a potter's wheel, where a woman shapes clay with practiced hands. Her fingers coax the material into bowls, jugs, and small storage containers. The earthy smell of wet clay fills the space, and you note the faint scratch of a carving tool etching simple decorations into the surfaces. Quirky tidbit: some potters believed that spinning the wheel clockwise encouraged good luck in storage, while counterclockwise might summon mischief, probably a convenient explanation for cracked jugs. You tentatively touch the rim of a newly shaped pot, feeling the smooth, cool surface, and marvel at the combination of patience and creativity that transforms a lump of mud into a useful, beautiful object. Nearby, a cooper bends and taps staves to form the base of a barrel. The smell of freshly cut oak is almost intoxicating, mingling with smoke and clay from other workshops. The rhythmic tapping of the mallet and the whispered counting of joints create a hypnotic pattern. You watch closely as the barrel takes shape, understanding that even something as simple as a container requires skill, attention, and years of experience. Historians still argue whether barrel making was ubiquitous or limited to villages with access to larger markets. But in practice, almost every village had some form of coopering, given its essential role in storing food and ale. A group of children plays at the workshop edges, mimicking adults with sticks as pretend hammers and looms. Their laughter blends with the constant din of tools, a reminder that learning in the village often comes through observation, imitation, and participation, rather than formal instruction. Quirky fact: Some children secretly practiced carving or weaving at night by candlelight, believing that skills improved if performed under a quiet, mystical glow. You watch a small boy carefully threading a string of wool, concentration etched on his dirt-smudged face, and feel the continuity of tradition in every motion. The smell of tanned leather draws your attention next, where a cobbler works over a small fire, heating and shaping hides. You can see the roughness of raw leather transform under skilled hands, becoming soles, belts, or simple boots. The hiss of water as it meets hot leather, the snap of stretched hide, and the occasional bark of a dog nearby create a lively, chaotic symphony. Historians still argue whether leatherworking techniques were shared freely among villages or guarded jealously as family secrets, but the evidence of well-formed boots and belts suggests experimentation and communal learning. Moving toward a corner workshop, you glimpse a carpenter, sawdust clouding the sunlight streaming through a window. He's shaping beams for a house, hammering pegs into joints with calm precision. You notice tiny notches and carvings, both functional and decorative, hints that even everyday objects carried subtle artistry. Quirky tidbit: some carpenters believed that whistling while sawing kept wood from splitting, a belief that seems more charming than practical. But you can't help imagining a village chorus of whistling workers. The rhythmic thump of hammer on peg, scratch of saw, and occasional whistle form an unintentional lullaby, grounding the village in productivity. You step outside briefly, feeling the warmth of the sun after the heat and smoke of the workshops. Villagers carry goods from one shop to another, balancing baskets of clay pots, bundles of wool, and lengths of timber. The sense of interdependence is palpable. Each craft supports another. From the blacksmith's nails to the carpenter's planks to the potter's jars. You probably won't survive long without understanding these connections, because one missing link could disrupt the village's fragile economy. Historians still argue whether trade networks extended far beyond neighboring villages or if most production stayed local. But the flow of materials and labor suggests a delicate, self-sustaining system. You notice small signs of ingenuity everywhere. A pulley rigged to lift sacks of grain, a stool converted into a mini workbench, a leather strap patched and reused countless times. Every object speaks to resourcefulness and necessity, and you can feel the collective intelligence of generations embedded in these simple, effective designs. Quirky fact: some workshops kept tiny figurines or charms tucked away, supposedly to inspire skill or protect against accidents, a whimsical blend of superstition and morale-boosting ritual. A sudden shout draws your attention. A wheel has slipped on uneven cobbles, and a villager runs to steady a cart loaded with supplies. The interplay of human skill, animal strength, and basic engineering is on full display, and you watch, fascinated, as the situation is resolved with minimal fuss. The village hums with energy. Hammers strike, wheels roll, animals bleat, and voices chatter, creating a sensory tapestry, both chaotic and harmonious. Historians still argue whether workshop organization was hierarchical or collaborative, but the apparent efficiency and rhythm suggest a nuanced social structure based on skill, trust, and necessity. You pause to examine the walls, covered with tools hanging on pegs, stacks of raw materials, and completed items ready for use or barter. The sense of controlled chaos is comforting. Nothing is wasted, every object has purpose, and everything is in flux, constantly being remade, repaired, or repurposed. Quirky tidbit: some blacksmiths would secretly inscribe small symbols or initials into tools, like a medieval signature or a charm for good fortune, a practice that allowed future owners to identify or revere the maker. You trace one symbol lightly with your fingertip, imagining the hands that hammered, shaped, and cast it into form. The sun climbs higher, and the air becomes thick with warmth and the smell of metal, leather, and wood. Sweat beads on your forehead as you follow villagers juggling multiple tasks, repairing carts, sharpening blades, shaping clay, weaving cloth. You can feel the rhythm of labor, the interplay of skill and necessity. the subtle humor in small mistakes, and the satisfaction of seeing a task completed. Every clang, whir, and thump is part of the song of the village, a mechanical and human symphony. As you leave the workshops, hands dusty, clothes slightly singed, and ears ringing faintly from hammering, you carry a sense of awe. Every object you passed, be it a woven cloth, a forged nail, or a shaped pad, presents countless hours of labor, inherited knowledge, and human creativity. You feel the village's heartbeat, not in the roar of plowing fields, but in the smaller, intricate hum of workshops where survival, beauty, and ingenuity meet in every crafted item. The village is alive, layered, and entirely dependent on the skills of its people. And you've just walked through the pulsating core of its creativity. You leave the workshops behind and wander toward the center of the village, where the marketplace bustles with energy, color, and noise. The sun reflects off clay pots, woven baskets, and piles of grain, while vendors shout to attract attention over the cacophony. You probably won't survive long in this sensory overload without being jostled or accidentally grabbing a stranger's loaf of bread. But it's impossible not to be captivated by the life unfolding before you. Historians still argue whether most villages had permanent markets or relied on periodic fairs. But today, the square feels like the heart of trade, gossip, and occasional mischief. You duck under a canopy of rough-hewn poles draped with cloth and immediately smell the mingling aromas of fresh bread, salted fish, and dried herbs. A baker lifts a tray of golden loaves, sending a puff of warm flour into the air. You reach out instinctively to touch a crust, but the baker's eyes follow your hands with mild suspicion. Quirky fact: some bakers believed that tapping the bread 3 times before sale would bring good luck to the buyer, probably an excuse to sneak a secret taste themselves. You inhaled deeply, feeling a strange joy in the simplicity of the aroma, warm and comforting against the backdrop of market chaos. Nearby, a vendor weighs sacks of grain on a crude balance, jingling coins in hand while exchanging news with a neighbor. The sound of metal on wood resonates, a rhythmic punctuation to the buzz of conversation. Children dart between stalls, occasionally snatching a sweet from an inattentive parent, giggling before vanishing behind baskets of cabbages. Historians still argue whether market transactions were formalized with contracts or largely based on trust and reputation. But the scene before you suggests a delicate balance maintained by community norms, honed over generations. You step past a stall selling pottery and notice a woman inspecting a small clay jug. She lifts it to the light, judging its weight and symmetry, occasionally tapping it lightly against a finger to test its durability. Quirky tidbit: some villagers believed that if a jug rang hollow when tapped, it would bring misfortune if used to store ale, a superstition that seems arbitrary yet widely observed. You feel a faint thrill in being among these everyday rituals, realizing that even commerce is steeped in sensory evaluation, tradition, and small personal quirks. At the edge of the marketplace, a man displays brightly dyed wool and cloth, draping colors over the stall like a miniature rainbow. The dyes derived from plants and insects gleam in the sunlight, and you can almost see the hours of labor it took to create these threads. Villagers run fingers over fabrics, discussing quality, softness, and durability while comparing prices. Historians still argue whether dyers kept formulas secret or freely shared techniques. But the vibrancy of the goods suggests knowledge passed down carefully, with just enough openness to keep trade lively. The marketplace is alive with movement. Chickens squawk as they're examined by potential buyers. Fish glisten on ice-strewn tables, and cured meats hang in twisted aromatic bunches. You notice a man bartering vigorously, his voice rising and falling, gesturing with hands sticky from syrup or honey. You probably won't survive a modern cashless transaction without laughing at his animated performance. Yet here, it's entirely normal, a dance of negotiation, intuition, and showmanship. Quirky fact: some villagers carried tiny charms in their pockets to ensure fair trades or avoid being cheated, blending superstition with business acumen. You wander deeper, observing the informal gossip network that thrives alongside trade. Whispers of who borrowed livestock, who had a spat at the last feast, and who scored a good harvest circulate freely. You overhear snatches of conversation and catch yourself grinning at the timelessness of human curiosity. Historians still argue whether gossip functioned primarily as entertainment, social regulation, or a mix of both, but the palpable energy suggests all three. Children repeat lines they've overheard, adults smirk knowingly, and you realize that information flows as freely as coins. A young apprentice tries selling hand-carved wooden toys to distracted parents. They jostle their wares, offering small smiles and exaggerated gestures to coax attention. You bend to examine a tiny carved horse, noting its uneven legs and charming imperfection. Quirky tidbit. Some villagers believed that hand-carved toys imbued with love would protect children from minor injuries, a magical charm in plain sight. The stall is modest, but the effort reveals how every villager contributes to commerce, not only through necessity, but creativity and hope. Nearby, a spice merchant displays small cloth bags of fragrant powders, mustard seeds, dried herbs, and exotic cinnamon that has traveled hundreds of miles to reach this village. You inhale carefully, feeling a tingling sense of wonder at the idea that distant lands contribute to the tiny square of dirt you stand upon. Historians still argue whether villagers actually used spices sparingly for flavor or more to flaunt status. But either way, the smell and novelty elevate daily life beyond mere survival. You notice a subtle hierarchy in the market. Some vendors shout louder. Others have prime spots near the well, and certain customers are treated with preferential nods. It's a microcosm of the village's broader social order, unspoken yet clear to those who navigate it regularly. Quirky tidbit. Occasionally, a clever trickster would weigh coins against a stone to cheat a distracted vendor, an early form of financial mischief. You duck behind a stall, suppressing laughter at the audacity, imagining how village disputes could flare over something as simple as a loaf of bread. As noon approaches, villagers pause briefly for a light meal: bread, cheese, perhaps a slice of salted pork. The market hums with energy, yet a subtle lull ripples through as bellies fill and children rest. You notice that even this pause is communal. People swap stories, comment on prices, and tease one another in gentle banter. Historians still argue whether meal times were rigidly scheduled or opportunistic, but the shared rhythm of eating and socializing reinforces bonds stronger than contracts or laws. The market also serves as a stage for entertainment. A minstrel strums a lute, singing tales of heroic knights or comical mishaps. And villagers gather in small circles to watch, laugh, and toss a few coins. Quirky fact. Some performers carried tiny puppets to dramatize parts of their stories, adding visual flair to oral tradition. Children mimic the movements, while adults grin knowingly, enjoying both the distraction and the subtle lessons hidden in narrative. You watch, feeling the joy ripple outward, and understand how entertainment functions as both diversion and social glue. You move toward a corner where medicinal herbs and small remedies are displayed. Dried flowers, roots, and powders are arranged carefully, each promising some relief from common ailments. A villager explains to a curious child which herbs soothes fevers and which calm stomachs. Historians still argue whether such remedies were genuinely effective or mostly placebo, but the confidence and ritual in their use give them power beyond scientific validation. Quirky tidbit. Some herbs were believed to ward off curses or influence dreams, blending medicine and superstition seamlessly. You meander through the market, noticing the ebb and flow, trades made, arguments settled, laughter shared, and goods exchanged. The square is a living organism, each villager playing a role, each sound and scent a vital pulse. You probably won't survive ignoring the sheer interconnectivity of this place, because every gesture, barter, smile, or whispered warning feeds the communal heartbeat. Even a dropped coin or misjudged barter could ripple through relationships, And yet, the system hums along with remarkable resilience. By mid-afternoon, you step back, hands slightly sticky from honey, pockets dusted with flour, and senses overwhelmed with sights, sounds, and smells. The market reveals both the necessities and delights of village life: sustenance, commerce, gossip, superstition, and fleeting joy, all interwoven in a tapestry of human experience. You've glimpsed the energy, skill, and improvisation that allow the village not merely to survive, but to flourish despite scarcity and labor. The market, more than any other single location, embodies the communal intelligence, resilience, and spirit of the medieval village. As you move toward the outskirts of the square, you carry a mental collage of color, sound, and aroma: golden bread, vibrant dyed cloth, the metallic temps of coins, laughter of children, and faint whiffs of herbs and spices. The marketplace is a microcosm of the village itself, a vibrant network of survival, ingenuity, and human connection. You feel rooted in it, like one more participant in this intricate dance. Understanding that every object, voice, and gesture has a place in the shared story of life here. You leave the marketplace behind, stepping onto the uneven stones leading to the village church. Its modest bell tower rises above the thatched roofs, chiming softly to signal the hour. The scent of burning tallow candles mingles with the lingering aroma of herbs from the market, and you feel an almost reverent hush settle over the square. Historians still argue whether medieval religious observance was more deeply spiritual or socially performative. But as you approach, you sense that faith permeates every corner of village life. You probably won't survive ignoring the rituals here, because even casual presence feels like participation in centuries of communal belief. The church door creaks open under your touch, revealing a dim interior lit by scattered candles and a few sunbeams piercing the small windows. Pews are simple benches, worn smooth by generations of sitting, kneeling, and shifting feet. You notice the flicker of shadows dancing across rough-hewn walls, each movement lending a faint theatricality to the sacred space. Quirky fact: some villagers believe that placing a feather under the altar would ensure dreams of divine favor. A subtle reminder that superstition and faith were often inseparable. You step further inside, feeling the cool stone beneath your feet and hearing the echo of whispered prayers. A priest moves quietly, preparing for morning service, adjusting a simple wooden lectern and straightening cloths on the altar. The smell of incense, faint but lingering, fills the air, a sensory thread linking prayer, ceremony, and daily life. Historians still argue whether incense was primarily symbolic, functional for masking odors, or a combination, but you can feel its presence as both comfort and ritual. Outside, villagers gather in small clusters, chatting quietly before entering. Women adjust their shawls and headscarves. Children clutch their parents' hands, and a few men lean on walking sticks, casting wary glances at the bustling square. You notice that even the seemingly mundane act of entering church carries weight, posture, timing, and demeanor communicates social cues just as much as spiritual devotion. Quirky tidbit: some villagers kissed the threshold before stepping inside, believing it prevented evil spirits from entering the sacred space. A blend of superstition and devotion that feels both quaint and earnest. The service begins with a low hum of chanting, voices blending in a gentle cadence that seems to float above the walls. You probably won't survive this without feeling a subtle tug at your own sense of rhythm, even if you're unfamiliar with the words. The congregation sways slightly with the chants, children fidget quietly, and elders nod in solemn recognition. The light shifts as sunbeams strike the altar, illuminating carved figures and simple frescoes painted in muted colors. Historians still argue whether villagers fully understood theological concepts or engaged more for social cohesion, but the ritual's gravity is undeniable. After prayers, the villagers disperse briefly into the churchyard, where seasonal rituals take place. A small procession winds around the graveyard, carrying candles and crosses, and the scent of wildflowers mingles with candle smoke. Quirky fact: Some villagers carried bits of blessed water to sprinkle on livestock or doorways, blending faith with practical concerns like crop protection or disease prevention. You watch a child tiptoe forward to mimic the adults, spilling a few drops and giggling at their own clumsiness, a moment of innocence amidst solemnity. Seasonal festivals bring the entire village together in ways that go beyond daily worship. You join a circle of villagers dancing around a maypole, ribbons twisting in the breeze. Laughter rises above the occasional bark of a dog, the clink of coins, and the distant hum of work from nearby fields. Historians still argue whether such festivals were originally pagan traditions adapted by the church or purely Christian celebrations. But the energy is unmistakable. Communal joy, rhythm, and shared memory binding the village together. Quirky tidbit: during harvest festivals, some villagers tossed small clay figurines into fields as offerings, a symbolic gesture to ensure bounty, blending superstition and gratitude in equal measure. You move to a small booth offering fortune-telling for curious villagers. A woman shuffles cards and traces lines on palms, her fingers darkened with soot and ink. Children watch, parents laugh quietly, and coins change hands with playful seriousness. You probably won't survive ignoring the allure of these minor mysteries, because even fleeting superstition carries the weight of tradition. Historians still argue whether such practices were widely feared, humorously tolerated, or a mixture of both. But they clearly play a social role, connecting individuals through shared belief and mild suspense. Back inside the church, the congregation gathers for a final hymn. Candles flicker, the air grows warmer, and voices rise in unison. You feel a subtle pull, as if the rhythm of chant, candlelight, and communal presence has embedded itself in your bones. Quirky tidbit: some villagers believe that holding hands during hymns enhance the spiritual effect, a charming combination of physical connection and faith. You reach out, linking your fingers with a few nearby hands, feeling the unspoken community of believers that spans generations. After the service, you wander the churchyard, noticing the weathered gravestones etched with names and dates, their surfaces softened by centuries of wind and rain. You pause, imagining the lives commemorated here, from infants who never left the cradle to elders who shaped village memory. Historians still argue whether medieval gravestones reflected true social status or were more about personal expression. But each stone, tilted and worn, tells a story of continuity, loss, and memory. Quirky tidbit: some villagers tied ribbons or placed pebbles atop gravestones as offerings, little gestures of care and remembrance, echoing human need to leave marks on the world. The churchyard spills naturally into an open space where seasonal fairs might gather. You notice carved figures, colorful banners, and small stages for music or storytelling. Villagers mill about, chatting, laughing, and enjoying respite from labor. You probably won't survive this without noticing the blending of sacred and secular. Because religion and festivity coexist seamlessly, each enhancing the other. Historians still argue whether fairs were originally commercial, religious, or social in intent, but the joy, camaraderie, and ritual are palpable. As you step away from the church and festivals, the smells, sights, and sounds linger. Burning tallow, candle smoke, faint music, and the soft murmur of prayers and chatter. Faith and festivity are interwoven into the very fabric of the village, guiding behavior, reinforcing social bonds, and adding texture to daily life. You feel grounded, aware that belief, whether deeply spiritual, casually superstitious, or somewhere in between, shapes not only the village's moral compass, but its daily rhythm, its laughter, and its shared story. You leave the church behind as the sun climbs higher, the faint echo of bells fading into the background. Your ears are still attuned to the distant laughter of children, the occasional chant from inside the walls, and the soft, almost imperceptible rhythms of work resuming elsewhere. Quirky fact: during certain feast days, villagers would smear honey or flour on each other in playful displays. blending mischief and tradition in ways historians still debate for their symbolic significance. You step lightly, carrying the layered experiences of ritual, superstition, music, and movement, ready to immerse yourself next in the essential matter of sustenance, the village's food, storage, and the delicate dance of famine and feast. The aroma hits you before you even reach the village granary, a faint mixture of dried grain, earth, and the subtle temps of fermenting barley. You probably won't survive poking around the storage without sneezing a dozen times, but the experience is mesmerizing in a tactile, almost primal way. You step toward a large wooden building, reinforced with thick beams and a slightly sagging roof. Inside, sacks of wheat, oats, barley, and rye are stacked neatly, or at least as neatly as weary villagers can manage, ready to sustain the community through seasons of toil. Historians still argue whether medieval granaries were primarily communal or controlled by wealthier villagers, but in practice, everyone depends on their careful maintenance. You touch a coarse sack, feeling the grain shift and settle beneath your fingers. The texture is oddly comforting, a reminder that survival is tactile, hands-on, and intimately connected to daily labor. Quirky fact: some villagers claim that speaking kindly to stored grain improved its longevity. A belief that seems whimsical, yet underscores how superstition and practicality often coexisted. You notice that the granary is dark, cool, and dry, a stark contrast to the sunny chaos outside, a quiet sanctuary for sustenance. The granary is not the only space for food storage. You wander past a cellar where barrels of salted pork, smoked fish, and pickled vegetables are stacked carefully, the pungent aroma filling the narrow space. Small wooden platforms keep containers off the damp floor, while rodents and insects are a constant, low-level threat. You probably won't survive ignoring them for long, because even minor infestations could ruin the week's provisions. Historians still argue whether medieval storage techniques were sufficient or largely trial and error, but the villagers' ingenuity in design, from elevated platforms to ceiling methods, demonstrates adaptability and foresight. Near the back, a woman inspects earthenware jars of honey and mead, lifting lids to sniff the contents, tasting here and there. Quirky tidbit: some believe that bees imbued honey with spiritual properties, making it useful not only for sweetening, but for minor medicinal or ritual purposes. You notice her fingers are sticky, glinting in the dim light, and you marvel at the simple joy of these preserved, golden treasures. The jars are bulky and heavy, yet the careful organization reflects meticulous planning, a balance of labor and foresight essential to village survival. A small boy brings in a basket of eggs, tipping it gently to avoid cracking the fragile cargo. The smell of straw mingles with the broader scent of the granary, an earthy, organic perfume. You watch as a woman carefully counts the eggs, sets aside broken ones for immediate use, and piles the rest in straw-lined trays. Historians still argue whether egg production was primarily domestic or also a source of trade, but their role in daily nutrition is indisputable. Quirky fact: some villagers placed tiny charms under the eggs to ensure fertility or ward off misfortune. Small gestures that weave superstition into routine tasks. You wander to the edge of the room where wooden tools for food preparation are stored. Mortar and pestle, simple knives, and flat boards for grinding grains. Everything bears marks of repeated use, grooves carved over decades of pounding, chopping, and kneading. You probably won't survive ignoring these artifacts without imagining every meal ever prepared with them, each texture, smell, and flavor embedded into human memory. The grain, now ready for milling, will become bread, porridge, or ale staples that form the backbone of village nutrition. Historians still argue about how uniform diets really were, but the evidence of variety, from grains to preserved vegetables, suggests a nuanced and pragmatic approach. A group of villagers begins the process of grinding grain with a small hand mill. The repetitive, rhythmic motion of turning the stone fills the room with a hypnotic vibration. You dip your fingers in the emerging flour, feeling it soft, fine, and slightly warm. Quirky tidbit. Some villagers whispered little encouragements to the mill, joking that it would grind faster if you treated it kindly, a reminder that humor and superstition coexist in daily labor. The flour is then bagged, ready for baking, brewing, or cooking. Another link in the chain of sustenance connecting labor to nourishment. You step outside briefly to watch a villager carry a sack of grain across the village. Shoulders straining, boots sinking in mud. The grain will feed not only this family, but perhaps several households if it enters communal storage. Historians still argue whether collective grain management prevented famine, or whether it merely delayed crises. But you can feel the weight of responsibility and community in every step. Quirky fact: some villagers tapped the sack 3 times on the ground before entering the granary, believing it would ward off pests or bring good measure, small ritual to assert control over a precarious resource. Moving toward the communal kitchen area, you notice a woman kneading dough on a floured board, children hovering with curiosity and impatience. The smell of rising bread is intoxicating, and you probably won't survive the temptation to touch, taste, or just inhale it fully. The dough is sticky and elastic, demanding both patience and skill. Quirky tidbit: some families left a small pinch of dough outside the door overnight to feed the spirits. A practice rooted in folklore that ensured both household protection and the promise of plenty. Historians still argue whether such gestures were primarily symbolic or reinforced a tangible sense of abundance and control over the unpredictable food supply. Nearby, another villager stirs a large pot of porridge, thick and earthy, steaming gently. The aroma mingles with that of baking bread, creating a comforting, almost hypnotic atmosphere. You notice the children lining up, spoons in hand, eager for their portion, and adults sharing minor scraps or tastes. Quirky fact: some families sprinkled small bits of herbs or honey into porridge, both for flavor and perceived medicinal benefit, illustrating how practical nutrition, taste, and superstition intertwine. Outside the kitchen, a small pen holds chickens, rabbits, and a piglet or two. The animals are not just food sources. They are living reminders of seasonal cycles, care, and labor. You probably won't survive ignoring the connection between tending livestock and village survival, because these creatures represent both immediate sustenance and the continuation of farming cycles. Historians still argue whether medieval villagers had consistent breeding strategies or relied more on intuition and chance. But observing them gives you a tangible sense of how animal husbandry shapes everyday life. Water, of course, is central to food preparation and storage. You follow a villager to the well, where buckets are hauled carefully, ropes strained under the weight of liquid. The cool splash and faint metallic scent of iron in the water is refreshing, almost startling in its contrast to the heavy smells of grain and hearth. Quirky tidbit: some villagers tied charms or knots in the rope for good measure, believing it kept the water clean or the spirits at bay. You probably won't survive ignoring these rituals, because they illustrate the constant interplay of practicality and superstition threaded through daily sustenance. As the afternoon stretches, you see villagers dividing harvested crops, drying herbs, and ensuring proper storage. The rhythm is slow, methodical, yet punctuated with small bursts of laughter or playful teasing. Quirky fact: some grains were stored with small stones, supposedly to keep away malevolent spirits or rodents. Blending physical precaution with superstition. Historians still argue whether these methods were widely effective or mostly symbolic. But the combination of hands-on labor and belief reinforces the connection between humans and their environment. By evening, the granary quiets, the aroma of stored food lingering in a comforting haze. You watch villagers carry baskets of fresh bread, vegetables, and herbs back to their homes, preparing for the evening meal. The care, ritual, and creativity invested in storage and preparation reveal a world in which survival, taste, and superstition coexist seamlessly. You probably won't survive ignoring the subtle interplay of labor, ritual, and nourishment, because each step harvests Storage. Preparation is a thread in the intricate web that keeps the village alive. Stepping away from the granary, you carry the tactile memory of grain in your hands, flour on your fingertips, the smell of smoke and yeast, and the quiet hum of labor completed. The village thrives because of attention, ritual, and shared knowledge, a reminder that sustenance is both practical and sacred. Quirky tidbit. Some families kept a small portion of every harvest tucked away for emergencies. Wrapped in linen or buried briefly in the earth, physical manifestation of hope and foresight. The granary, like the village itself, is alive, a pulse of survival, community, and ingenuity that will accompany you as you move into the next rhythm of life, the vital yet exhausting work of crafting, mending, and maintaining the village's physical and social fabric. You step into the village lanes as the late afternoon sun slants low, casting long shadows across thatched rooftops and uneven cobblestones. The familiar hum of labor from the fields and workshops fades slightly, replaced by the softer, steadier rhythms of repair, maintenance, and daily upkeep. You probably won't survive ignoring the sheer importance of these tasks, because without them, the village's fragile balance would collapse. Historians still argue whether medieval villages prioritize communal projects over individual maintenance. But observing the villagers now, it's clear that both intertwine seamlessly. A carpenter hunches over a half-wrapped paired door, tapping in wooden pegs with calm precision. The rhythmic thump of hammer against wood carries through the alleyway, joined by the creak of a cart's axle as it is carefully lubricated with animal fat. You notice the meticulousness of each movement. Nothing is wasted, every scrap measured for reuse. Quirky fact. Some carpenters carve tiny symbols into beams, supposedly to bring luck or ward off spirits, blending superstition with craft. You probably won't survive failing to notice these subtle signs of care, because they are both functional and symbolic, a quiet narrative written into the wood itself. Nearby, a young woman sweeps the courtyard of her home, pushing dirt and leaves into a neat pile. Children run past, chasing a rolling hoop, their laughter punctuating the steady scratch of the broom. Historians still argue whether sweeping rituals had practical, spiritual, or hybrid significance, but the action itself is undeniably part of maintaining both order and comfort. Quirky tidbit. Some villagers left small offerings in corners they swept last. Believing that spirits would bless the household, a charming overlap of superstition and cleanliness. You wander toward a small bridge spanning a muddy stream, where a villager repairs a worn plank. The creak of the wood, the scent of damp earth, and the occasional splash of water beneath your boots form a layered sensory experience. Every plank replaced or tightened reflects not only practical skill, but communal responsibility. Neglect would risk accidents, interrupted travel, or damaged livestock. You probably won't survive ignoring these small but vital labor acts because they uphold the flow of life in the village. An apprentice blacksmith carries buckets of water to temper metal, moving carefully across uneven stones. Sparks from a nearby forge dance like fireflies, and you feel a sudden warmth from proximity. Quirky fact. Some smiths whispered encouragement to glowing metal, insisting it would cooperate if treated kindly. An odd blend of superstition and motivation. Historians still argue whether such practices were widely believed or more playful gestures. But you can't help smiling at the devotion woven into work. You pause by a thatched roof, noticing a family repairing the straw layers with meticulous care. The father lays bundles of reeds, the mother binds them securely, and the children fetch smaller twigs and ropes. The smell of dry straw mingles with sweat and the faint tang of clay plaster used on walls. You probably won't survive ignoring the importance of roofing, because a single leak could cascade into structural failure and lost possessions. Quirky tidbit. Some villagers tucked tiny charms into roof thatch to ward off lightning or misfortune, blending spiritual protection with structural necessity. Moving deeper into the village, you observe fences being mended with sticks and twine, supporting gardens, livestock pens, and property boundaries. Villagers exchanged tools and advice freely, demonstrating that maintenance is both communal and practical. Historians still argue whether fence repair and field maintenance were more formalized or left largely to custom. But the outcome is unmistakable. Boundaries define both space and social order. Quirky fact: some fences were decorated with small carvings to ward off evil or mark family lineage. An intriguing intersection of identity, superstition, and utility. You wander past a small workshop where a tailor repairs torn clothing. Hands nimbly stitch patches into worn tunics, mending seams with precision and care. The smell of thread oil and faint perfume from previously worn garments mixes oddly with the smell of smoke drifting from the forge nearby. You probably won't survive ignoring the subtle artistry of repair. Because clothing is not merely functionally, it's a statement of identity, comfort, and sometimes status. Historians still argue whether sewing and mending were gendered tasks or shared responsibilities, but the dexterity on display is undeniable. Nearby, a woman churns butter in a wooden vessel, turning cream into a staple food product with rhythmic precision. The sound is steady, hypnotic, and comforting, a soft counterpoint to the hammering and sawing echoing from adjacent workshops. Quirky tidbit: some villagers believe that speaking soothingly to the cream ensured richer butter. Another example of superstition subtly intertwined with labor. You probably won't survive ignoring this tactile connection to food preparation, because it underscores how effort, patience, and small rituals shape survival. You cross a muddy lane to a communal well, where villagers draw water in heavy buckets. Some use the water immediately, others carry it for cooking, washing, or livestock. The sound of splashing and the faint metallic temps permeate the air. Historians still argue whether well management was primarily cooperative or individually managed. But the efficiency of usage demonstrates a learned balance between scarcity, necessity, and social coordination. Quirky fact: some villagers tied knots in the rope or whispered brief blessings over the water, blending superstition with practical care. In the outskirts, fences, carts, and simple bridges receive careful attention, while livestock is herded and penned. Oxen are groomed, cows milked, and chickens fed, demonstrating that maintenance extends beyond buildings into living resources. You probably won't survive ignoring the interdependence of tasks, because carelessness in one area can ripple through the village ecosystem, affecting both work and sustenance. Historians still argue whether livestock care was strictly ritualized or primarily pragmatic. But observation reveals a balance of both. Children imitate adult work quietly, fetching tools, brushing straw, or stacking firewood. Their play blurs with labor, a living apprenticeship where observation, repetition, and mimicry ensure the continuity of skill. Quirky tidbit: some children were taught little chants or songs to accompany repetitive labor, blending entertainment with memory, rhythm, and superstition. You watch their careful mimicry, realizing that education in the village is a tactile, immersive experience that knits together skill, culture, and social cohesion. By late afternoon, the village hums with quiet diligence. The air carries the smells of wood, sweat, straw, and damp earth. Villagers move with rhythm, their steps guided by experience, necessity, and communal awareness. Tools are sharpened, planks repaired, thatch adjusted, fences mended, and meals prepared, creating an intricate network of labor that is at once invisible and essential. You probably won't survive ignoring the synergy of these acts, because each task is a thread in the fabric that holds the village together. As the sun begins to lower, the golden light touches repaired roofs, patched walls, and freshly swept lanes. Quirky fact: some villagers painted small symbols on doors or beams to mark completion of tasks or to invoke protection, subtle imprints of human care and belief. You step lightly along cobbled alleys, sensing the quiet dignity in maintenance and repair, understanding that it is as critical as labor in fields, craft in workshops, or food stored in granaries. Every movement, smell, and sound reminds you that survival is not only about work, but attention, care, and ritual, a seamless blend of the practical and the symbolic that ensures continuity. The village is alive in a quiet, sustained rhythm. You notice small imperfections, everywhere slightly crooked fences, sagging doors, uneven cobbles, but these are not failures. They are proof of human effort, ingenuity, and ongoing attention. Historians still argue whether villages would have functioned as effectively without centralized oversight, but the evidence of continuity, improvisation, and communal care is clear. The balance of labor, skill, and superstition maintains a living ecosystem where every act, no matter how mundane, contributes to survival. As twilight approaches, shadows stretch and mingle across repaired structures, freshly swept lanes, and pens brimming with animals. You probably won't survive ignoring the subtle poetry in this evening tableau, because the work of the village is both functional and beautiful. Quirky tidbit: some villagers sang softly while completing final repairs, believing that a song could encourage structures to settle correctly or protect them overnight. The melody blends with the sound of creaking beams, rustling leaves, and distant calls, composing a lullaby of labor, care, and continuity that carries the village safely into night. The village cools as evening settles in, bringing long shadows and a gentle hush over the cobbled lanes. Smoke rises lazily from chimneys, mingling with the fading scent of freshly baked bread and the earthy tanks of tilled soil. You probably won't survive ignoring the subtle transition from day to night, because the rhythms of labor and rest overlap seamlessly, guiding villagers toward rituals, meals, and reflection. Historians still argue whether nighttime in medieval villages was dominated by rest or quiet socialization. But observing the glow from windows and the soft murmur of voices makes the answer feel clear. It's a balance. You wander past cottages where families are lighting hearth fires, their smoke curling skyward in thin, fragrant tendrils. The scent of burning wood is comforting, yet it carries the reminder of vigilance. One stray spark could ignite disaster. Quirky fact: some villagers believe that tossing a pinch of salt onto embers encouraged warmth and warded off evil spirits, a charming blend of superstition and practicality. You probably won't survive ignoring these small rituals, because they reveal how daily life is inseparable from belief, instinct, and the constant negotiation with potential danger. A mother stirs a pot of stew over the fire, the thick aroma of vegetables and salted meat filling the small kitchen. Children cluster nearby, elbows brushing, eyes wide in anticipation. You notice the careful way she ladles portions, reserving slightly larger amounts for laborers returning from the fields. Historians still argue whether medieval diets were nutritionally adequate or largely repetitive and monotonous. But the sensory richness of these evening meals paints a more nuanced picture. Quirky tidbit: some villagers added small herbs or flowers to stew, believing it improved both flavor and fortune, blending practicality, taste, and superstition effortlessly. You drift toward a corner where men and boys repair tools after a long day. Hammers strike with measured rhythm, blades are sharpened, and leather straps are replaced. The smell of oiled wood, metal, and sweat mingles in a satisfying cocktail. You probably won't survive ignoring these efforts, because the village's survival depends on tools functioning perfectly tomorrow. Historians still argue whether evening maintenance was universally practiced or performed sporadically, but the observable diligence suggests a widespread, shared commitment. Quirky fact: some villagers whispered encouragement to stubborn tools, joking that a polite word could help a blade cut more easily, merging humor, superstition, and necessity. By the river, water is drawn for the evening wash. You see women and children working quietly, dipping buckets and wringing cloths, their hands wrinkled, wet, and red from the cold. You probably won't survive ignoring this chore because clean water, washed clothes, and maintained hygiene directly impact health, comfort, and social respect. Historians still argue whether medieval hygiene practices were shaped more by superstition or empirical experience. But the careful coordination and repetition indicate both knowledge and ritual. Quirky tidbit: some families added flowers to wash water, believing it improved the scent of linens or invited blessings for the household. The village animals are rounded up for the night. Chickens cluck and squawk as they are herded into coops, pigs grunt in pens, and cows settle in their stalls. The low hum of contentment and occasional squabble creates a comforting soundscape. You probably won't survive ignoring the interdependence here. Because livestock represents both sustenance and ongoing labor for the next day. Historians still argue whether animal enclosures were meticulously managed or left more to chance. But careful observation reveals structured care, often guided by tradition. Quirky fact: some villagers whispered good night to the animals or tapped wooden charms on pens to ward off nocturnal predators, merging affection, ritual, and superstition. Inside cottages, firelight flickers on walls, casting soft shadows over rough-hewn furniture, woven textiles, and simple decorations. You notice small tokens, a carved figure, a painted tile, or a woven charm tucked into a shelf. These artifacts may seem insignificant, yet they reveal the human need for continuity, protection, and small joys. You probably won't survive ignoring them, because they are more than decoration, they're daily reminders of culture, belief, and identity. Historians still argue whether such items were primarily symbolic, functional, or a mixture, but their presence is ubiquitous and telling. Outside, the village square empties, except for a few late travelers and night watch volunteers. Lanterns flicker as shadows dance along the cobblestones. You probably won't survive ignoring the significance of these faint guardians, because they ensure safety, mark boundaries, and maintain order in a world without modern lighting or law enforcement. Quirky tidbit: some villagers placed small charms in lanterns, believing the light would guide spirits safely away or ward off mischief overnight. Historians still argue whether watch routines were strict or informal, but the arrangement reflects a delicate balance of community, trust, and shared responsibility. Children are tucked into simple beds, sometimes accompanied by a small animal for warmth, occasionally soothed by a parent humming a familiar tune. You notice the rhythm of breathing, the soft rustle of straw mattresses, and the comforting cadence of a night spent among family. You probably won't survive ignoring this intimacy because it is as essential to village continuity as food, work, or craft. Quirky fact: some parents sprinkled a bit of flour or salt around the bed as protection, a subtle charm reinforcing safety, tradition, and peace of mind. Historians still argue whether these practices were widespread or localized superstitions, but they illustrate the inseparability of ritual, belief, and domestic life. In some homes, older children tend small fires or fetch water for morning chores, learning responsibility through observation and practice. The night is quiet, but the rhythm of preparation for the next day persists. You probably won't survive ignoring these formative experiences because they shape the next generation's skill, knowledge, and understanding of communal life. Quirky tidbit: some villages had special bedtime stories that doubled as moral lessons or practical instructions, blending entertainment, education, and subtle socialization. Historians still argue whether storytelling was more recreational or instructional, but its persistence suggests a mixture of both. The blacksmiths forge cools, the hiss of last embers fading. The market stalls are empty, tools stacked neatly, cloth rolled carefully, and a lingering scent of dust, wool, and metal hangs faintly in the air. You probably won't survive ignoring the subtle pause in activity because it signals a temporary rest before the next cycle of labor, a quiet acknowledgement of human endurance. Quirky fact: some blacksmiths left a small mark on the last tool of the day as a personal signature or charm for safety overnight, a tiny ritual bridging work and superstition. By nightfall, the village is hushed, illuminated by scattered hearths and a few lanterns. You wander slowly, listening to the distant lowing of cattle, the occasional bark of a dog, and the soft whisper of wind through trees. The smell of smoke and baked bread lingers faintly, mingling with cool air and the scent of damp earth. You probably won't survive ignoring the tranquility, because it represents the culmination of daily labor, survival, and human connection. A rare but vital pause in an otherwise bustling life. Historians still argue whether the night was genuinely restful or filled with quiet labor. But observation suggests a delicate blend of both. The village has shifted from activity to reflection, movement to rest. Every house, lane, and courtyard is imbued with the rhythm of human effort, superstition, and tradition. You probably won't survive ignoring this holistic view, because it reveals the intricate balance that sustains life, weaving together work, faith, ritual, and community. Quirky tidbit: some villagers performed a final check of doors, windows, and fire before sleep, believing that one last act of care would safeguard them against misfortune. A blend of diligence and superstition that echoes through centuries. As you walk back toward your own temporary resting place, the hush of the village enfolds you. You hear faint creaks, rustling straw, and soft murmurings, all underscoring a living, breathing ecosystem. The interplay of light, smell, sound, and motion settles gently, reminding you that survival is more than labor, is ritual, attention, and communal care. You probably won't survive ignoring this delicate equilibrium, cause it defines not only the day's end, but the promise of the next. Night deepens, and the village is draped in quiet shadows. Lanterns gutter softly in doorways. The last fires and hearths hiss and settle. And the air is thick with the gentle aroma of smoldering wood mixed with the faintly sweet scent of drying herbs. You probably won't survive ignoring the nocturnal life of the village, because even in apparent rest, people, animals, and nature are engaged in a subtle, continuous rhythm of survival. Historians still argue whether villagers relied more on night watches or instinctual caution. But tonight, the balance of vigilance and rest feels tangible, almost musical in its quiet pulse. You wander past cottages where families are nestled in straw mattresses, blankets drawn tight. Children stir occasionally, murmuring in sleep or clutching small toys, while parents breathe steadily, sometimes glancing at the embers of the hearth before closing their eyes. Quirky fact: some villagers hung small charms above beds to ward off nightmares or evil spirits, a practice rooted in both superstition and the human need for comfort. You probably won't survive ignoring this intersection of ritual and rest, because it's a reminder that even sleep is structured, guided by belief and necessity. Outside, a light fog rises from the stream, curling along fences, pens, and carts left from the day's work. You hear the distant lowing of cows, the occasional bleat of sheep, and the rustle of small creatures foraging. Historians still argue whether medieval night sounds were considered menacing or merely background ambiance. But your senses register a living ecosystem that never truly sleeps. Quirky tidbit: villagers sometimes placed small bells or markers near animal pens to alert them to predators or mischievous spirits. Blending practicality with superstition in a way that feels both ingenious and charming. You approach the village edge and notice a faint glow in the distance. A small night fire where travelers or night watch volunteers keep vigil. You probably won't survive ignoring these lone points of light, because they are critical to safety, communication, and social cohesion. The volunteers sit quietly, occasionally stirring coals or whispering instructions. Historians still argue whether night watches were formalized or casual, but their presence highlights the delicate network of responsibility linking every villager to the collective good. Quirky fact: some watchmen carried tiny charms or tokens for protection, a reminder that superstition infused even the most practical tasks. You return to the main lanes, where the faint creak of doors and shutters accompanies the soft crunch of footsteps on cobblestones. Every house exudes warmth and care. Patched roofs, swept thresholds, and the lingering aroma of evening meals. You probably won't survive ignoring the sensory continuity here, because it reinforces how labor, attention, and habit intertwine with comfort and safety. Historians still argue whether evening routines were strictly enforced or socially reinforced. But the evidence of meticulous care is clear. At the communal well, you notice a single bucket swinging gently, left to drip overnight. Quirky tidbit. Some villagers believed leaving a small stone in the bucket prevented spirits from tampering with the water. An amusing yet revealing blend of caution and superstition. You probably won't survive ignoring these small gestures, because they encapsulate the broader human effort to maintain balance even in mundane details. Inside one home, a mother whispers a bedtime story while a child listens, eyes wide with wonder. The story blends historical figures, moral lessons, and fanciful creatures, sometimes entirely imaginary, sometimes rooted in reality. Historians still argue whether oral storytelling primarily educated or entertained, but you can see that both purposes coexist seamlessly. Quirky fact. Some tales incorporated local landmarks or village gossip to reinforce memory and social cohesion, a playful yet functional method of transmission. You probably won't survive ignoring the subtle power of these narratives, because they are threads in the web of cultural continuity, weaving past into present. Elsewhere, small fires crackle and cooking hearths left burning just enough to preserve warmth overnight. You notice smoke drifting lazily through chimneys, faintly aromatic with herbs or resin. Quirky tidbit. Some villagers placed protective charms near the hearth to guard against house fires or mischievous spirits. Blending practicality with belief. Historians still argue whether fire maintenance rituals were primarily safety-driven or symbolic, but the result is clear: warmth, comfort, and continuity of household life. You probably won't survive ignoring this interplay of practical care and ritual, because it shapes both physical and emotional security. You wander to the outskirts again, where fences, pens, and carts stand quietly under moonlight. The animals are calm, settled for the night, and their steady breathing creates a soft rhythm that harmonizes with the rustle of leaves and distant calls of nocturnal wildlife. Historians still argue whether nocturnal animal management was rigidly structured or more instinctual, but observation reveals a balance of care, vigilance, and ritualized routine. Quirky fact. Some villagers whispered goodnight to animals or tapped protective charms on pens, a tender and practical acknowledgement of interdependence. You probably won't survive ignoring this, because it underscores the intertwined nature of life, labor, and belief. As midnight deepens, the village is cloaked in near silence, punctuated only by faint whispers, the creak of timber or distant wind in the trees. The sensory landscapes, smoke, earth, herbs, and soft animal scent envelops you. You probably won't survive ignoring the profound stillness, because it is both restorative and reflective. A pause in the continuous cycle of labor, ritual, and survival. Quirky tidbit. Some villagers kept small trinkets under pillows to invite peaceful sleep or dreams of protection, a charming practice blending comfort and superstition. Historians still argue whether such practices were widespread or localized, but they clearly reveal the human need to influence unseen forces, even during rest. Finally, you settle near a flickering hearth yourself, the day's experiences coalescing into a slow, calming rhythm. The village sleeps, works, celebrates, and cares in cycles that repeat endlessly. A network of actions, rituals, and attentions bound together by necessity, habit, and belief. You probably won't survive ignoring the intricate choreography of this life, because it demonstrates resilience, adaptation, and community in its purest form. The soft whisper of night carries through the village, and you feel the layers of life, the smell of smoke, the warmth of hearths, the echoes of laughter, the subtle hum of night watch, the gentle breathing of animals, and the quiet presence of superstition and ritual fade into a gentle lull. Every element, no matter how small, participates in the delicate balance that ensures survival, continuity, and comfort.